I'm Kathi Moore.
And I'm Louise Andrews.
And we've known each other since I was 1 and
I was 3.
Through our parents who met in Spectrum Musical Society and then Bangor Operatic. And we're on a mission to try and collate the archives of Bangor Operatic before they all disappear. The Operatic started in 1919, just after World War I. The story is that there were 2 gentlemen who were fighting in the war, and they agreed that if they both survived, that they would start a musical theatre society when they got back, and they both survived. So they first performed in the Dufferin Halls.
That's in Hamilton
Road. And then they also performed in mostly Belfast, in the Empire, the Opera House, and the Tonic here in Bangor. And in 1949, after World War II, they then started to take over what we then knew as the Little Theatre.
Who were the 2 men? Do you know their names?
I know that Doc Emery was one of them, and he went on to have a very lucrative career in music. He moved across to England, but I'm not sure who the other one was. So if anybody knows,
let us know.
Yeah.
So 1949, obviously the society's growing and they decide they have to have their own premises, and they moved to Central Avenue.
Yes.
Was it a purpose-built theatre?
No, it wasn't. So originally it was a school for young ladies upstairs in the main hall, as we would have known it as the theatre. And downstairs then was a range of shops. So eventually they took over the shops, and Rediffusion became, which was an electrical store, became the foyer. And there was an Abbey Press Printers who then became the Scenery Bay. And there was always a shop in the bottom left-hand corner, which became a hairdresser's at one stage.
Okay.
By one of the members.
And what was it like when you 2 joined the society?
Well, I suppose we joined by default.
We did.
Because
we did.
Our parents were members, and we were brought to every rehearsal, every meeting.
Tell me a wee bit about your parents, Louise.
Derek and Anne Andrews were my parents, both still with us, thankfully. Neither parent had any history of musical theatre or anything in their family, but both are still very capable and very musical still to this day. So they enjoy a sing-song and a wee dance still. So yes, so we were trailed to everything, and we were used as, you know, we need a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. There you go, here, there's Kathi, there's Louise, use them. So we were on stage probably before we even knew we were on stage. And then
we became members.
We became
members
and fell in love with it. Yeah.
And Kathi, your mum and dad?
Winston and Maggie Johnston. And Dad, he joined the Operatic in the early 70s. He was in Spectrum Musical Society with Derek first. And then Derek said, come on down, join Bangor Operatic. And he joined. And he was a lifelong member then. And enjoyed doing lots of different shows.
So you said, you know, if you needed a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old to do something, what are your earliest memories of being on stage at the Little Theatre?
Oh gosh, earliest memories of being on stage are probably, my first show was actually a lot later than that I remember, was The Music Man, where I was one of the children in The Music Man. Papa, Papa, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming from the depot. That was my one line. But before that, I just remember constantly being in the theatre, and we played in every wee nook and cranny, and I could walk you through it now.
Hide and seek,
birthday parties,
everything. There was a fabulous rehearsal room downstairs, which was known as the Denby Bell room, and Denby Bell was who actually owned the premises, and that floor was such a lovely bouncy floor, and we ran and played games.
Swinging doors, and we used to run through the swinging doors.
So were you two there because your parents were so actively involved? They would have been painting scenery or having a rehearsing or
Yes.
whatever.
Yes. My brother ended up, he would have joined. He wasn't one for singing and dancing, but he loved the scenery, so he ended up helping paint and build scenery
But then
as
you
he
always
got
need
older.
that in a theatre company or whatever. There has to be somebody that will
Yep.
twiddle the knobs for the sound or paint the scenery.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Can you remember your first line spoken on the stage?
I can, and it was my last line, and it was actually in the last show that I ever did. I never had any lines because I was a dancer. So my first line was in Sweet Charity, and it was after the theatre had closed, and we were doing it in the Arts Theatre in Belfast, and I had to shout, "Oh my goodness, I think she's drowning." As you can tell, I'm not an actress.
I think you did it really, really well. You remember it from the 1970s. We'll skip forward a wee bit. When did the theatre actually close? When did Bangor lose the little theatre?
1992. Yes, I think, or 93. Yeah.
And what happened? Why did that happen?
Denby Bell passed away, and obviously then, because he owned it, it had to be, sold,
But
I think. But
the upkeep, there was so much that needed done to bring it up to fire regulations and everything else. And we tried to raise funds to help with that, but it wasn't enough. And, and the owners just, unfortunately, they didn't have the money either. They were just regular people like us. So we tried for a few years to keep it on and do what we could. But in the end, unfortunately, we just couldn't afford to keep the building on, and unfortunately it was sold and demolished, and there's now
Housing.
Simon community there.
But the Operatic had been there for over 50 years then.
yes,
So-
yes, yeah.
And the reason why we're talking today is because we want to try and bring back some memories of the society and its time
Absolutely.
at the little theatre.
Yes.
Yes.
I asked you about your first memories, and you said about birthday parties you had there and things like that. Can you remember any of the really big, exuberant, outstanding, award-winning shows that you might have been involved in?
I'm not necessarily involved in, but I remember Hello Dolly with Florence Slowden.
Oh, absolutely.
And I remember Dad in the pyjama game, because he had to wear pyjama bottoms and no top. And I was mortified. But I think I remember the pantomimes more than some of the bigger shows.
Certainly from
Because
a younger age.
from a younger age, because as a child going to see a pantomime, your dad would have been Dame. My dad was usually the Baron or the Mayor, or, and we just loved the pantomimes.
Were you actively involved in them as well?
Yes.
Yeah, we would have been.
Yes, over the years as we got older, yes. We would have been, when we were younger, we would have been one of the children up on stage, to talk to the dame or and have a bit of fun there. But later on, when we were older, we were in the chorus or dancers. And Kathi later on then, she played the lead.
Ooh.
She was Prince
I
Charming.
was Prince Charming in Cinderella in 1987. I was 17.
Oh my goodness, the perfect
And
age
how,
for it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I had a great time doing that. And I remember, so there was always a rumour that the theatre was haunted. And I remember standing ready to go on stage and felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned round and there was nobody there, and a butterfly flew past. And this was in January. Butterflies don't, they're not usually around in January. And this butterfly flew past me, and it was often said that that was the ghost of the little theatre if you saw a butterfly. And I nearly forgot to go on stage. I was like, ooh.
I haven't heard this, that there was a ghost. Did any other
Apparently
people?
we had two ghosts. Yes, Doc Emery who was one of the founders, was supposedly, he visited quite a lot, and then also a monk who, the little theatre, there's a lot of rivers under Bangor, and a little theatre used to sit over one of the rivers, and where the old Bangor Grammar School used to be, apparently there was a monastery there, and one of the monks drowned in the river, and apparently that was him that haunted the little theatre. I didn't see him myself, but
No. I say I had the experience with the butterfly, but other than that, So I'm sure there are others out there who remember having the chills of experiencing something like
Quite a
that.
number of the older members would reminisce about seeing people.
We were very
Yeah.
fortunate because in the 70s, as children just coming into the, hanging around the theatre with our parents, we were able to go and see some of the really big names who had been the stars of Laura Carr, Foster Davison, George Smith was always in
George
Panto,
Smith.
Florence Loudon, all those big names.
Leila
Maureen
Webster.
Campbell, Leila Webster was in so I've got in some of the programmes that I've been collating. Leila Webster was in probably the 40s and 50s, and a lot of those, and Colin Blakely, who went on to do the big screen. He was in a few. In the 70s, we were still on the tail end of those big stars starring in shows. Maureen Campbell was always the brilliant Wicked Witch of the West.
Oh, she was fabulous.
And the you say that, and the society was known throughout Northern Ireland, Ireland, and the whole of the British Isles, really, because it swept the boards
It did.
in awards,
Yes.
didn't it?
Went to
Absolutely.
Waterford quite regularly and won awards all the time in Waterford Festival of Light Opera. I also found in the archives a list of other names who were getting the Heysham ferry over to England to go in the 50s and take part in a festival over in England. So they definitely toured around, and as I say, the amount of awards they won in Waterford Festival was something else. Best actress, best choreography, best set. I mean, it was the full range. It wasn't just
One
one
or
or
two.
two people. It was quite a range of awards.
Both of you played a very big part in it. Tell me this: do you still dance? Do you still sing?
Do you know, funnily enough, no, I don't. I went on to teach, and I suppose I did the school shows, so my time was taken up through that. So I didn't continue on with my involvement in Bangor Operatic from about 1993. I think I probably stopped performing, and but as I say, my dad was a life member, and he continued to perform, right through until he was probably in his, I would say maybe his late 60s, early 70s.
What about you, Louise? Do you still dance?
I've still got my tap
Oh, good
shoes.
girl.
And I still can tap. Maybe not as good as I used to. But no, 1995 unfortunately was my last show, because with the jobs that I had, I did shift work, and it was really hard to get to do it,
Rehearsals.
to get rehearsals, and so yeah, unfortunately.
It's a
But-
huge commitment taking part in a show. I mean, usually it was 6 to 8 weeks of maybe 3 or 4 nights a week, every week rehearsing, and then you would perform for 2 weeks. So it was an intense, and if you were doing 2 shows a year, that took up a lot of time in your year, so maybe for 5 to 6 months out of the year you could be involved in, if you were doing 2 shows a year. So it was a huge commitment. So to those who continued to do it throughout their life, I have a lot of admiration for those people
absolutely.
who were constantly involved.
Yes.
And Dad did, and your dad did as well. They both worked in the bar, in the little theatre.
So did I.
They were on the committee. Yes, they were on the committee. They were, treasurer, secretary, so there was that involvement as well.
Tell me, Kathi, why you're on this quest to find out more about what people might have hidden in boxes in their attics and garages.
Well, 2 things happened quite close together. My dad passed away, and I had to clear out his house. And as I was clearing out his house, I found a box of programmes and photographs from the 1940s, and a set of tools that had all belonged to a member called Sandy Dalzell. Now, I don't remember Sandy, but I think he was perhaps around in the early 70s.
I
Are
remember
these some of
Sandy.
them that you've got here?
Yes. So those are some of the tools that I have that were Sandy's, that he would, if he was stage manager. Those are some of the tools. Some of the old photographs go back to shows from the 1940s. And there's a photograph I have of the, probably one of the first ones, of the Little Theatre in 1949. It's of the door of the Little Theatre as you would have gone in, but not from, if you were in the theatre in the 70s and 80s, you would remember going in through the foyer. And this was the door next to the foyer, because in the 40s, they only operated upstairs. And this was the door that went down a big long corridor. The Denby Bell room was at the end of the corridor. You turned left and up the stairs and into the rehearsal, into the dressing rooms, and you were into the theatre then. And so this was the original door of the little theatre in 1949. And it actually has a sign outside the door for a company from London who were coming over to perform during the summer. So the theatre was used not just by Bangor Operatic, by a lot of visiting artists from all over, especially during the summer when we had, in those days you had like a summer scheme almost of activities. So I found all of those, and then during the same time Bangor Operatic wound up formally last year and decided to close its books. And I thought, oh, we have 100 years worth of history that is currently scattered all over the world, not just in Bangor. And I suppose I inherited the stuff that I found in Dad's, and I love history, and I wanted to preserve the history. Not everybody feels the same. And so I can just imagine how much of Bangor Operatic stuff has been thrown out over the years as it's been found in garages and sheds and attics and cupboards.
Louise, does your dad, does your family have a big archive of bits and pieces?
My dad had scrapbooks going back from the early 60s or the mid 60s of Spectrum right through to the end of the 80s. So I think Dad's collection was added to the Peroni collection, and it pretty much made up the 70s and 80s, didn't it?
Yes, I know.
Because he kept such a good record.
You're saying the Peroni collection. So that's the Public Records Office
Of Northern Ireland.
Now, Kathi, you've been in touch with them, and
Yes.
I think people will find this interesting, that they were interested in what you're trying to do.
Yes.
So
yes.
tell me a wee bit about that.
Well, I contacted them because obviously I wanted this to go somewhere that it can be preserved. And the Public Records Office take large collections and small collections. So far, we have been able to give to them 77 programmes and hundreds of photographs, including a photograph of the first show in 1919, which is wonderful, and it's an original photograph, so that's lovely to think that something that is 106 years old has been preserved. And we can add to the collection constantly. It's not that we've done it and that it's closed. We can now keep adding to the collection. Photographs, tickets, programmes, posters, minutes of meetings, agendas. We've been able to give them, seating plans from the little theatre, tickets for after show parties, which were always good fun. You had to get a ticket before you were allowed in. So we've given them lots of stuff already.
Is there anything that you're still hoping to find? Are there particular programmes, for example, that you haven't been able to track down? Photographs of certain people, eras? I mean, you mentioned that your dad had more or less covered the 1970s and 80s for them. Anything missing that you'd really like to find?
Well, believe it or not, we're actually probably missing the last shows that were done, the most recent ones. So people probably still have their programmes from taking part in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so we're missing. I think the last show was 2012.
What were the names of the shows? Can you remember any of them?
Oh gosh, now you're asking.
I think Seven Brides for Seven Brothers,
yes,
was one that was done in Glenlola, the old Glenlola,
yes,
which is now Academy.
Yes, Bangor Academy.
So it was done in that building, and there was a couple of shows done in there, but just remember Seven Brides because I went to see it. I was extremely impressed with the dancing. It was incredible. So from such a young cast, it was absolutely fabulous. So they did quite a few in there over the years, and maybe up in Newton Abbey as well.
Yes, they did in Newton Abbey Theatre at the Mill and things like that. So the most recent, but also the very, very original. So wouldn't it be fabulous to get something from the 1920s, which we don't have? Now, we have here some from the 1920s that have been given to us on temporary loan from 1928. It's the earliest one. We're going to make a digital copy of those and return them to the owner, whose father was an original founding member of the society. So Peter Radcliffe was a member himself for most of his life, and his father was an original member. So the family have been involved in Bangor Operatic for its entire company, and 4 generations of the family, as far as I know, were involved. We have a T-shirt that has the drawing of the little theatre on it, and Peter's son Zane he did the drawing of the little theatre to put onto the T-shirt. And this is a programme from 1928 that we have as well. It is printed in, I suppose, like very old cream paper, and almost like a brown print. And it has on it the name of the show in the front, the company, the patrons, the vice presidents. So there's a lot of information in the programmes.
So what was the show?
And the show was the Mikado.
Okay, and who starred in that?
Let me open the programme, and we have, well, Billy Cairns lived in Bangor, and he was musical director for a lot of the shows. And Billy then went on to be a musical director in a lot of the companies up in Belfast when he moved to Belfast. And you'll see names like Radcliffe, Moore, but some of the Bangor names that you see coming up, that maybe some of us who are old enough to remember them. But we have the Mikado of Japan was an H.J.N. McElroy. And Nanki Poo was played by a J. Torney. Coco was C.D. Radcliffe. Pooh Bah was J.R. Moore. And Pish Tush was R. Pollock.
Wait, so we got no first names
We've got
here.
no first names. It was very formal in those days.
And I see at the back it has a nice little thing. It says behind the scenes.
Yes. So quite often, Bangor Operatic nearly always hired professional coaches from England, directors to come over and produce the shows. So Quentin Golder was the coach, and he would have been accommodated in local bed and breakfasts while he came over to produce the show. And I have letters from the 70s that are similar, where they've written to a local bed and breakfast and asked them, can they let us know if we have availability for our coach coming over, and those producers would have been brought over. And then you have thanks for the stage manager, for Oceanic Engineering Company Belfast for kindly installing electric light in 1928, and Mr. E. Gordon for the use of his premises and services as sole booking agent for the production.
Gosh,
So
it all sounds
it's
very
such a history.
professional and organised in
It
those
really
days.
was.
But then
it continued to be so right throughout
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
history.
It had to be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, to put on a production with singers, dancers, scenery, a bar, everything,
Costumes.
that just doesn't happen overnight.
And I will mention, late train, the BCDR have kindly permitted the 10:30 p.m. train to start at 10:37 p.m. every night except Saturday. Tram will connect with same. So the trains were actually, and that's come up in several programmes, rearranged to allow patrons coming to see a show in Bangor to return home. Now, you wouldn't find that nowadays. We also found that the Society produced a booklet. I suppose they were like little newsletters called brevities. So we had never heard of that. You had to be in to understand some of the jokes. But these are from the 30s, and these were produced every week apparently, and printed by the Spectator offices, I believe. They had little jokes, little updates on what was happening. For example, in conclusion, I hope that anything that is said herein will not be used as evidence against the editor, for in sooth an editor's life is not a happy one. And that was from the J.A. Valentine, the Honorary Secretary, in 1929. I think that one was the earliest.
It's a beautiful little booklet in kind of like the font and everything that they use. It's so much of their time. But if they produced one of these on a regular basis, it must have been a really flourishing society at that time.
It really was. They quite often produced their shows, as I say, in Belfast in the Opera House or the Empire Theatre, and so they would have drawn quite large audiences and had their performances on for over 2 weeks, quite often sometimes
So
3.
they're really becoming part of the entertainment programme for the
Yes.
whole of Belfast. I can imagine the Opera House or whatever will say, well, we have so-and-so coming from England, so-and-so coming from Dublin, and then we have Bangor Operatic Society
yes.
as part of the summer season or whatever.
During the war, they entertained the troops here in Bangor, probably in the halls, Dufferin Halls and the Tonic Cinema. So in the Tonic Cinema, the troops who were training, there were a lot of American troops over here in Bangor, but it's stationed in Donaghadee, I believe, and they would have been brought to Bangor to be entertained for the evening in the Tonic Cinema.
Do you have any of those
So
programs?
no, unfortunately I don't, which would be amazing to get. But we also have ones then from, I suppose, the 60s and 70s and 80s, you know, right through. So South Pacific, the range of shows they did was always very interesting. And I suppose there's George Smith, the Ringlands, Foster Davison. Foster Davison was semi-professional, as was Laura Carr. And then later on we had people like, I was going to call him Billy Porter, but he had to change his name because there's another famous Billy Porter. He's now Billy Carter. And Christopher Logan and Molly Logan, who both trained and have performed in the Globe. And Zoe Rainey, who are both been on the West
Ex-BBC.
End.
And
Ex-BBC,
BBC.
yes. And there's the iconic Hello Dolly. And a lot of people will remember going to see Hello Dolly.
Some of these are from the 90s, just before the theatre closed. They used to redo the shows every few years, so you would find that The Boyfriend was a popular show that would happen every few years. Hello Dolly we did a number of times. Anything Goes by Cole Porter was a big show that people loved because they loved the music from it. Sweet Charity, Annie Get Your Gun, South Pacific.
A lot of Gilbert and Sullivan.
We did a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan because it was happy and cheerful and everybody knew the songs to it. But then you would get The Merry Widow, Iolanthe, that type of one is maybe a wee bit more dramatic. You know, The Mikado,
Yes.
that kind of thing. We did more pantomimes, I think, Kathi and I, rather than the big shows. We did a couple of big shows, but we would have been more the pantomimes.
And again, I suppose the pantomimes kind of go in a circle as well.
Yeah, Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Aladdin. Yes, I think my Uncle Cecil might have been wishy-washy at one point. So, you know, yeah.
I met my husband in The Wizard of Oz. I walked into the Denby Bell room and there he was sitting and I was smitten at the age of 14.
That's so sweet. Was he there to sing as well?
He was a munchkin and
We were all munchkins in that
we were
show.
all munchkins and that was it.
Where would you suggest that people go looking for little pieces of information? Going on your experience, obviously, with the passing of your daddy and going through his stuff, and your father was very good at keeping a scrapbook. Where do you want people to start looking? What do you want them to think about?
Well, I think the older generation tend to keep things that they assume their children are going to want to keep. I'm a great believer in the gentle art of Swedish death clearing.
Yes.
And it's about maybe looking for things in their attics and in the top cupboard of your wardrobe, that you put things
Memory
boxes and maybe even into the shed where they've gone a bit dusty and mouldy, and
Dress up boxes.
yeah, and just for the younger generation to maybe ask parents and grandparents, do you have anything connected to Bangor Operatic? I remember you were in it, and if so, would you like it to become part of a legacy? Because that's what this is. We're leaving a legacy with the Public Records Office that hopefully will be, there for life, and you'll always be part of it.
And you mentioned dress-up boxes. So are you looking for things like maybe old costumes, hats, props?
The Public Records Office can't take that sort of thing, unfortunately. They can only take the paper. That is what we're focusing on at the moment. But certainly would be happy to take the other things, because we're hoping then that we can find another home for the more, as I call it, physical three-dimensional items. So the tools, the T-shirts, we've got the portraits that used to hang in the foyer there. And we've got lots of other bits and pieces that people have, and they don't want to throw it out, but they don't know what to do with it.
Obviously, people can get up to the Prony and they can ask to access the collection. Who do you imagine being interested in it? What value has it for the whole community?
Quite a wide range. The adverts in it are in some of the programmes from the 1940s and 50s post-war are absolutely phenomenal. Then the later adverts, for Bangor that are, I know the Hogs.
Everybody remembers Hogs. Some beautiful things at Hogs: Goose Girl and Farm Boy, Hogs, the Gift House of Ulster, Belfast, Ballymena and Bangor. I mean, if you ever needed a present for somebody, a wedding present or something like that, that was the only place you went to, was Hogs.
As you were saying, Kathi, it's a record of how Bangor was and what
Yes,
shops and
yes.
services were around.
Some of the shops I'd never heard of, but others I knew. So, for example, the McBurneys who owned Elizabeth's Florists were in Bangor Operatic. So, there's an advert there, and there's some of the companies though had advertised in the 40s are still advertising in the 70s. So the whole advertising alone, if you're interested in advertising and the history of Bangor. But then there's also family tree research. So if you're finding out, going to the Public Records Office to do research in your family tree, then your family member might come up as being a member of Bangor Operatic. Their photograph might be there.
You can you might be able to trace their journey from a Munchkin child
Yes.
to star of the show.
Yes, exactly.
They always had a list of members, so serving members and just supporting members in every single programme.
That's really useful, isn't it?
Yes,
For
it is.
genealogy.
It is, yes.
Because you can get them.
Yes, the
get
history
all
of
names.
print, for those who are it's a very niche interest, but certainly even how these programmes were printed in 1920s compared to, and the photographs, obviously the old photographs are fascinating.
And if somebody wants to have a look at the collection that's there at the moment, what do they do?
Well, at the minute it's still being catalogued, so it's not quite open to the public yet, but as soon as I know that it's open to the public, they'll be promoting that, and then they'll be able to go up and do a search online and get a catalogue reference number, and then they'll be able to go into the reading room, into the Public Records Office, and they submit a request to see the catalogue number and the boxes. Everything's in boxes, and it'll come out to you in boxes, and you'll be able to sit and go through all the programmes, and they're all ordered by decade at the moment. So everything is, Louise and I have spent a fair amount of time cataloguing and helping the Public Records Office by sorting everything into decades and listing everything that we had and the
it's
year.
not finished yet, and that's why you're making this appeal for more information.
Definitely.
Absolutely. No, the more we can get, I think the better a collection it will be. So if anybody has, as I say, programmes, tickets, posters, even if they were on the committee and they'd old minutes, agendas, photographs.
Only official photographs now. We don't want people's personal photographs, that keep them, but official photographs.
Yes, because obviously official shots were taken and put into the programmes, so if we don't have a programme, if we can get the official photographs, it would be lovely to have those as well. And we will just keep donating to the collection. The more we get, the more we will give.
And it's a labour of love for you, Kathi, and you, Louise, isn't it?
It's 100 years of Bangor's history, and you can't lose that. You just can't lose that.
No.
And it has brought Kathi and I together again as well. We didn't see each other for years, but now we've got this to research together. Mind you, Kathy's done most of the work, I just help. But it's lovely getting in touch with old members and listening to their stories as well, which has been fabulous because we weren't around for everything. So I think it's important for Bangor not to lose that and not to lose that history.
It was just wonderful talking to Kathi and Louise about Bangor Operatic Society and their efforts to make sure this part of Bangor's history isn't forgotten. My thanks to them for sharing their memories and showing me the collection so far. If you have something that might interest them, please get in touch with me via email on our website or on our social media. And maybe you have a little Bangor story to tell. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share and subscribe. Until the next time.